All right, last time I read, um, Helmuth and Rudy were talking about how Hitler has decided that he wants to conquer Russia, right? Because the Germans are now fighting against Britain, the British, and the Russians. And Helmuth thinks that this is a bad idea because if they're fighting both the British and the Russians, then every day that they're in Russia, they're concentrating on Russia, Britain is getting closer to coming back and winning, right? But Rudy says, we've got the best army in the world. And if Hitler wins Russia, think of what it will give him. Russian airplanes and tanks and guns. But Helmuth knows different. No one in history has ever conquered the Russians. Now, how many more people will have to die? On the RRG, Helmuth hears how the advancing Germans capture or kill great numbers of Russian soldiers. But the RRG never lists German losses. And so, for the truth, Helmuth tunes into the BBC. Late each night, he opens the hall closet and takes out the roll of radio. He locks the flat door and then hears a different story about German planes destroyed by the Russians, sunken transport ships, and soldiers killed or captured. The Russians are fighting bitterly and bravely, but only Helmuth seems to know. When the BBC broadcast ends, he has trouble falling asleep. The BBC keys him up, makes him hate Hitler and the Nazis and their secrets and lies all the more, makes him ache with worry for Gerard. Some mornings, Oma comments on the dark circles under Helmuth's eyes. She presses her hand against his forehead to check for fever. Are you getting enough sleep? She asks. I'm fine, Oma, he says. There's nothing to worry about. But he knows plenty that worries him, and one warm August night, as Helmuth walks with Karl along the billy, their talk turns to the war in Russia. The German people have been asked to donate woolen and fur clothing to the soldiers at the Russian front, where winter comes early. All the fur and woolen clothing can't prepare our soldiers for winter in Russia, says Karl. Our luck can't hold, says Helmuth. No army has ever won Russia, not even Frederick the Great or Napoleon. If we stop now, we'd have Austria, the Sudetenland, and Poland, says Karl. Isn't that enough? Europe isn't enough for Hitler, Helmuth says bitterly. Hitler believes the world peace can only come through German domination. The two friends walk on in silence. The secret Helmuth keeps to himself weigh heavier with each step. He thinks of Heinrich Mann and feels selfish. God gave him the ability to think for himself, and yet he fears doing what he knows is right. He longs to share the truth with Karl. You know what I think, he says to Karl. I'm afraid to ask, answers Karl. Helmuth lowers his voice. Our government is lying to us. That's what I think. Karl winces and draws away. It's dangerous to think that much, he says. Freedom has always been dangerous, says Helmuth. Come to my place tonight and I'll prove the Nazis are lying. But wait until after 9, after my grandparents go to bed. After a frugal supper of cabbage and carrot soup and Leberwurst, liver sausage, Helmuth hurries Oma as they clear away the dishes. Finally, Oma and Opa retreat to their bedroom and latch the door behind them. Helmuth paces the living room and listens for footsteps. At last he hears feet shuffle outside the flat. Before Karl has a chance to knock, Helmuth swings open the door. He ushers him in, his finger to his lips, signaling for quiet. So, what is it? Whispers Karl. What sort of proof do you have? You'll see, says Helmuth. He eases open the closet, takes out the roll of short wave radio, sets it on the kitchen table, directly in front of Karl. Karl swallows hard. Are you crazy? He gingerly touches the raised roll of lettering, as if afraid it will shock him, but then his eyes shine with interest. What can you hear on it? You'll see, says Helmuth, as he rigs up the wire antenna. He turns out the kitchen light, snaps on the radio. The radio hums to life. Its dim amber light casts an eerie glow in the darkness. Helmuth turns the dial. The radio crackles and squawks, interrupted now and then by a soothing French voice, then a wisp of violin and a quiet French horn. And then the first 4 notes of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony crackle in the speaker, followed by an announcer who says in crisp German, the BBC London presents the news in German. Karl bolts upright. That's England! Helmuth gives Karl a triumphant look. Settle down, he says. You don't want to wake my grandparents. He adjusts the volumes. What if someone hears us? Says Karl. Helmuth hears the nervousness edging Karl's voice. He nods toward the flat door and tells Karl, you don't have to stay if you're afraid. Karl shakes his head, settles himself firmly in the chair. I'm not afraid, he says. Good, says Helmuth, but he understands Carl's fear. His own heart pounds each time he listens to the BBC. It is every good German's duty to report enemy propaganda to the Gestapo, to turn in anyone suspected of listening to or reading enemy propaganda. Helmuth tries not to think about the danger. The news that night is all about the Russian campaign. It's nothing like the German reports. All week long, the RRG has boasted of great successes in Russia, one battle victory after another, with little to no German losses, as the German army advances on Smolensk. But the BBC tells a different story. The German approached within rifle range, recounts the BBC broadcaster. Then the Russians opened up the grenades and machine guns. The Russians organized a bayonet counterattack and forced the Germans to retreat. The Nazis left behind 2,500 dead and wounded, 30 tanks and Bren gun carriers, 80 motorcycles, almost 500 automatic weapons, 90 machine guns, and 45 mortars. Carl looks sickened. A bayonet charge? Helmuth feels sickened too. He can't bear to think what Gerard must face if he's sent to Russia. Do you think the BBC is telling the truth? Asks Carl. Helmuth nods. The BBC reports give more details. They give their own casualties too, not just ours. They don't hide the news from the British people. They just give the information without telling us how to interpret it. He looks at Carl. I despise the Nazis. I hate the way they bully people. I hate the way they lie to us, and I hate them telling me what to think. But what can we do? Look what happens when people speak out. They're arrested, taken to camps. Some are never seen again. Look what happened. Look what they did to Brother Warbs. I hate myself for doing nothing, says Helmuth bitterly, for allowing this to happen. Everyone craves security, but gaining freedom means losing security. You sound like a bloody pamphlet, says Carl. Helmuth likes that. Do you want to listen again tomorrow? He asks. Carl grimaces, looks sheepish. My parents won't let me out every night. They're afraid I'll get caught in an air raid. Helmuth knows Carl's parents are strict about curfew, especially his father, but he also senses his friend's fear of breaking the law. Carl leaves and Helmuth sits back on the table, presses his back against the chair. He twists the dial to the RRG, and he listens. He grows angry all over again at its twisted lies. Suddenly, Carl's face floats in front of Helmuth. You sound like a bloody pamphlet. You sound like a bloody pamphlet. A bloody pamphlet. A pamphlet. Helmuth feels his thoughts changing, charging ahead to a dangerous place. Slowly, an idea rises to the surface, floats in front of Helmuth. He catches it, breathes it in, and it grips him, won't let him go. He snaps on the light, takes out a piece of paper, jots down everything he can remember from the BBC broadcast. By midnight, he has an essay titled, Who is Lying?